Welcome to Home Health 360, a podcast presented by AlayaCare. I'm your host, Jeff Howell, and this is the show about learning from the best in home health care from around the globe.
Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Home Health 360 podcast, where we speak to home health professionals from around the globe. I'm your guest host, Erin Villier, Regional Director of Sales for AlayaCare Software. And today I am joined by two special guests, Bob Roth of Cypress Home Care and Neal Kursban of Family Nursing Care, to talk about the changing face of home care. Bob is the managing partner of Cypress Home Care Solutions. He opened the business with his family in 1994. He's got nearly 36 years of consumer product, healthcare, and technology experience, and he's successfully brought depth and breadth of his experience to the home care trade. He hosts a radio show called Health Futures, Taking Stock in You, and in addition to that, he writes a monthly column called Aging Today for the Jewish News of Greater Phoenix and Loving Life After 50 newspapers. Bob serves on the board of directors for the Home Care Association of America in Arizona. And in 2019, he was selected the winner for the Home Healthcare News Future Leader Award. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited for you to be here. And we have Neal. Neal joined the family business in 1995. He has worked every single job in the company. I think receptionist, care coordinator, caregiver services recruiter, intake specialist, you name it, IT manager, VP of sales, and on and on. But all of those roles enabled him to understand all the important details of running the company, and it gave him the background and knowledge he needed to lead the company into the future. Neal became president in 2008 and CEO in 2018, and he currently has plans to expand family and nursing care services to other markets. In addition to running his agency, Neal speaks at conferences around the country, and he writes articles that have been featured in a variety of national publications. Welcome to the show, Neal.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
All right, guys. Well, this is fun. I'm super excited to have you and have a question. So both of your companies have been around for many, many years. Neal, Family and Nursing Care for 53 years, and Bob, Cypress Home Care for 27 years. Between the both of you, your families have over 80 years of experience in the home care space. So what do you see the biggest change that's occurred since the early beginnings, and what has been the biggest change in the last decade? And let's layer some pandemic stuff on top of that. How has the pandemic changed the home care trade?
Take it away, Bob.
You want me to kick it off? I can. Well, first of all, it's interesting is, I have some great admiration for Neal and his family. 53 years, that's quite a testament to the work that they do in their community and in home care in general. When I entered into this space, there were less than 10 home care companies here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and they're probably close to 600 to 700 now. There wasn't really one franchise that was around. So I can't imagine what it was like back in the 1960s when Neal's family, specifically his mother, started the company and how things were different then. I can speak to the fact that what we have seen in this time is really the evolution, the respect. Home care was more of an afterthought, and a lot of times it still is. But, I like to say, I use the word respect, but we have been the Rodney Dangerfield of the healthcare continuum for a long time. And times have certainly changed. There's so many descriptors that have been given to our trade, right? Non-medical, non-clinical, private duty. What do all of these mean? I mean, especially when you start a trade out with a negative like non, it tells the world what you're not. It doesn't tell the world what you are. And, I love Neal's company's name because it describes who they are and the services that they do. But, we've evolved over time. And when you really take a look at where we've come since the for us, the 1990s, and for Neal since the 1960s, and he'll talk about that, to where we are today, it's very, very different. People understand in-home care services, in-home personal care services. It's continuously, it's something that we have to really do a better job of. Not that we don't do a good job, but we continuously have to educate people about these types of services, because it's still, to this day, it bewilders me that people don't know that home care agencies exist to help people age in place, to help them with activities of daily living. They still consider the work that we do nursing care. And quite frankly, one of the biggest challenges we run into is that many people think that Medicare pays for our services, or their Medicare Advantage plan does, or their supplement, or the managed care company that they have. Well, we disappoint almost 50% of our callers when we tell them that, I'm sorry, but your insurance company does not pay for these types of services. So it makes it really hard. So we've come a long way in the sense that our population's aging. The need continues to grow. I mean, we knew that baby boomers started turning 65 back in 2011. No one really started talking about the fact that they started turning 75 this year. I think we had a lot on our plate with the pandemic, but at the same time, they started turning 75, and we're almost at 2022. So in 9 years, they're going to start turning 85. So to answer your question, what has been the biggest challenge? I think it was a very different world back in the 1990s. It was much easier to find caregivers. The price of our services were much more reasonable than they are today. Minimum wage for me when I first started was less than $7 an hour. And, now we're at over $13 an hour in the state of Arizona. The services that we provide to our consumers that use our services were paying $15 to $16 an hour when I first started. And now they're paying somewhere from $31 to $39 an hour. So, the price of our services have gone up. The caregiver wages have increased. The supply of caregivers has gone down. And the need continues to outstrip the supply.
There's something wrong with
I don't
that
want to
math
take
problem,
up.
Bob.
I know there is, and quite frankly, that is the biggest challenge or conundrum that we are all faced with. And the only way we're going to solve this is working together. And I think if anything that I can talk to and attribute to is the fact that I think, and Neal can chime in on this, I think home care agencies have never worked closer than they have today. We have a number of home care agencies that we work really closely with. And when we're having supply, meaning caregiver challenges, we're able to lean on them and vice versa. So, I think that, if anything, has been something good that's come out of it, is that we're working together. But in the 27 years that I've been in the business, my family's been in the business, the demand is outstripping the supply. The cost of services continues to go up, and the caregiver wages have increased exponentially.
Neal, you're smiling.
How do I follow that? No, there was a lot there. So, a couple things I'll double down on is, yes, there are way more companies in the space. 1968, the stories I've heard from my mother, who I wasn't born yet, but from my mother has shared, I'll put that out there, is, there was no industry. There wasn't a competitor because there was nobody else doing it. So clearly, and then when I joined the company 26 years ago, similar to Bob's experience, there was, a dozen or so in our market, and then now there's hundreds and hundreds. So it's a very similar experience. And I'm on the East Coast, Bob's on the West Coast, and I think you could pretty much, you go to any city in the country and you hear something very similar. One of the things that I remember the first time that there was a TV advertisement for home care. I was like, whoa. It wasn't my company, but it was like, the industry is arriving. Like it's already made its way onto the television set. And that was like a big deal. And now you see a lot of ads about care and caregiving at home from various companies. And I think that's great. The exposure alone, to Bob's point, where people didn't know that the industry existed. They didn't know they could call a company, they get someone to help their 87-year-old parent or grandparent or loved one to get the care. So it's nice that more people are aware of, despite the Rodney Dangerfield, there is an element of that still, but there is much greater awareness across the country. And the other thing, and touching on the money side, is I recall also in the mid to late 90s when we were telling the caller, say, look, I have care and I have insurance that covers it. And I'm like, you don't, because insurance doesn't cover this, and Medicare doesn't cover this, and Medicaid doesn't, like it's a out of pocket, out of your own checkbook for save for a rainy day expense. And they said, well, you're mistaken. What are you talking about? And anyway, so it turns out that at the time I didn't know what long-term care insurance was. But fortunately, people, now obviously well aware, and over a third of our clients, closer to half actually, have long-term care insurance. But that's something that they've independently chosen to pay for the possibility of one day needing this kind of care. And so that is definitely different than just there was no such thing as long-term care insurance covering home care in the earlier part of the 90s and prior to that.
Well, I'm impressed, Neal, and I have to learn from you how I get my mix up to 50% of my client base paying for services through long-term care insurance. That in and of itself is quite an accomplishment. And I know, just knowing you, Neal, you have an entire department that is dedicated to that and dedicated to doing the claims processing and all that stuff on behalf of the client. So Kudos to you guys.
That is a true statement. Yes, we do make the payment experience simpler for the clients.
Long term.
And I do want to echo on your comment about the commercials. I thank Home Instead and Bright Star and Visiting Angels and all the franchisors that are out there running those spots on television, because what that does is it just draws awareness to the work that we do. And, people understand this work because they're seeing these spots running on television. So they really help not only their own entities, but they help our trade as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are other franchisors out there that I probably did not name. So it's not just isolated to those.
Well, they are raising awareness, and I think that's probably helping everyone just to bring more awareness to the industry in general, which leads me to another question. Like, you guys have been around for decades and decades, and there's not a lot of businesses that can survive that length of time in any market. So beyond raising awareness, beyond, navigating this really interesting math problem you presented to us, Bob, how have you been able to stay in business so long? What's your secret sauce? And is that even going to take you into the future?
Neal?
I like you, Bob, started. I followed it. That's better.
So for me, first of all, you have to evolve. The old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That doesn't work. And the definition of insanity from Einstein is, doing the same thing, expecting the same results. The landscape continues to change. Cypress, nearly 3 years ago, we made a conscious decision to change our model. And a lot of people looked at us really funny and said, why would you do what we did? And what we did was we took an entity that was 25 years in existence and we partnered with a group out of the San Francisco area called Honor. And Neal will tell you, as will I and many others, they were looked at as the evil twin sister out there, whatever you want to call them, because they were known as a disruptor and somebody that was really trying to come into this market and use tech to really differentiate themselves. And Neal and I, and Aaron, this too. This is a high-touch business. This business is personal. When a consumer opens up the door to their home, they open their life to a caregiver. So how in the world could you take a agency that has established themselves for 25 years and just turn it over to a tech company? Well, you know what? I have been involved around this one group called Aging 2.0, which is a curator or platform for tech and innovation for the senior world. And I had followed Honor from its very inception from 2014 to, at the time, it was 2018. And they certainly evolved. They understood. They stood up and opened up their own home care agency in San Francisco. So, yeah, they were somewhat a disruptor at first. And I think everybody was, really leery and concerned as to what they were going to do. But they've learned and they've changed. And I was not having an issue personally with recruiting caregivers, but the data that we were getting from resources like the Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute out of New York was not really looking good. We were going to have a shortfall between 2020 and 2026 of roughly about 1.8 million caregivers. They call them direct care workers. And in the state of Arizona, it was over 100,000. So I knew that Honor had a secret sauce, so to speak, to recruit caregivers and utilize their tech on the back end, but allow us to still be able to be relevant on the front end to do the care managing and the developing of relationships and all the stuff to establish trust in your community. So to answer your question, I mean, we have to evolve, whether you take a leap like we did at Honor or you change internally. You've got to really be able to overcome the obstacles that we are definitely faced with. And we talked about it on your first question about, the affordability challenge as well as the workforce challenge. So each one of us has, and the ones that have been around as long as Neal and I, we don't stay static. You got to be dynamic and you've got to be able to change. And, we certainly have embraced Honor. It's been a bumpy road for sure, but, we've smoothed out the kinks. We learned from each other. We just are in the process of re-upping our contract with them because it really is a contract. I can walk away if I wanted to, but I'm choosing to stay. But to answer your question, I mean, we have to look at all our options. How do we exist as entities? How can we be able to survive? And for me, it was, how do I survive for the next 25 years? Because we existed for 25. And today we're one of the home care agencies in the entire state of Arizona. And I thought Honor gave us the best chance to do that.
So the secret sauce. Yeah. Oh, should I?
It's your turn.
Be around as long as we have. So yes, piggybacking on some of Bob's comments around the need to constantly evolve and innovate and tweak. And I mean, that's has to happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be around. And similar to you, Bob, we also, in our particular market, we're the biggest company, and we actually, I think we're the largest company that serves out of one market. We do over 40,000 hours a week of care in a pretty tight geographic area. And so for me, there hasn't been like a playbook on with other companies at conferences about how do you get from, at the time, 20,000 to 25,000 or 25,000 to 30,000 hours. So I just, constantly trying and tweaking. And I remember internally changing our own business model, not through Honor or not through an outsource, not through a different company, but having to take what was working and realize, I don't think this model is going to work to get us from 25,000 to 40,000 hours. And so we had to sort of reinvent ourselves. And it took a lot of big leap of faith from not just for me thinking it's going to work, but also the trust of my staff and to say, look, guys, despite how well things have gone, we got to continue to evolve and change. So that certainly is the case. And yet at the same token, I would say there's certain things, the secret sauce hasn't changed. So on one hand, you have to do all that. And on the other hand, I'd say there's very, very little change to when I started and even to when my mother, who started the company in 1968, because our business in its simplest form is finding amazing, wonderful, caring, compassionate caregivers to go to the homes of people typically in their 80s and 90s. So the essence of what we do is very consistent. It's find the best, treat them well. They're going to treat the families and clients well. So that formula hasn't changed despite and Bob's right, all these statistics about the shortage and how to overcome it. I mean, all those challenges don't change to the end user. They don't care that there's a shortage. They don't care that whatever's going on. They just want to know that this caregiver in the house is going to care wonderfully for my 87-year-old mother, and there's going to be trust that I can leave the house and not worry because I have a stranger that's coming in that's going to build trust and really be there and be reliable and just dependable and be there. So again, yes, there's a lot of tweaking in the business model from the out internally, but to the end user, it's not that different.
I want to, if I can chime in, Aaron, family and nursing care, to Neal's point, they've evolved, and I learned so much from other home care operators, and I've learned a great deal from Neal. And, Neal he tends to be a little modest, and he's not as outspoken as I would like him to be, because he's done some really remarkable things. And Neal, if you wouldn't mind, share with us, your secret sauce to retaining caregivers, because you are an anomaly. You do it differently than anyone else. We know what Home Care Pulse tells us in their benchmarking studies, but the first time I asked you that question, you were in the single digit number in terms of turnover, not retention, but turnover. I know you creeped up into the double digit number around the pandemic. I don't know if you're still there or if you went back to single digit, but to me, that is an incredible accomplishment. And that's something that you are doing. And I think it speaks volumes to the fact that the business hasn't changed, and you're recruiting caring, compassionate caregivers to go into people's homes that are in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or 100s. But there's something that you're doing that connects family and nursing care with their caregivers to keep that retention
and
rate.
Just for the record, I didn't have to ask you for your secret sauce. Bob did that.
No, I'm happy to share. I think it's a great. I mean, is that where you want to go with this, Aaron?
It was in my mind to ask you. So let's just go there.
Sure. I mean, the caregiver shortage is a phenomenon that's not new, and it's only going to get worse. So that is the case. And then my view, just from a high level business perspective, is, you're any area of the company that's, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? That's an expression that is very true in business. And so, to me, the idea of someone calling, or for any of us or anyone listening that goes into a Starbucks, as Bob holds is that a Starbucks? What are we drinking? Anyway,
it's a tea. It's a tea.
From what company? Anyway, so you go into Starbucks and you say, "Hey, I want a coffee." And you're like, "Yeah, we're at a coffee." And you're like, "But I'm at a Starbucks." And so this notion that someone could call a home care company and say, "Yeah, I'm out of caregivers." Well, isn't that what you do? So this whole premise of so what can we then do to make sure that we have coffee, or we have caregivers, not just caregivers, but wonderful, great caregivers are going to make a difference in the life. So it's not just, do I have a caregiver? It's like having the right kind of caregiver. So to Bob's point, yes, we have very low retention. It's 12% at the moment. So 12% turnover of caregivers.
Yeah, I just want to correct you. High retention, low turnover. Go ahead, because you said low retention.
Oh, good point.
You're way too humble.
so go ahead and give those numbers again, please.
So it's we're at 12% turnover, which is high retention.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And we're proud of that. And it's not without. I mean, my whole view. This is kind of like a deeper philosophical view on. I happen to be in the home care space, but this is, in my view, people that are making lower amounts of money. It's hard to live on 13 an hour in your market, 15 an hour, like whatever the going wage is. And then companies that cap out, this is part of the secret sauce, that cap out and say, look, I don't want my people working more than 40 hours a week because it's time and a half, and I don't want to pass that cost to the customer. And I say, forget that. Let the caregivers work as much as they want to work. If they want to work 60 hours a week, or 84 hours, some 12-hour shifts is a very common shift in our industry, and 5 days a week is 60 hours. And some will say, it's not enough. for me to only work 60 hours Monday through Friday. I need another weekend job. So, I mean, to lose those, to then have to compete with another company to keep the caregivers, to me, doesn't seem like an approach. I don't like that approach. So I would prefer they all stay with me and just work, and they can even get more money when they work more than 40 hours a week. So we've kind of been known out there, and the clients tend to like continuity of care. A lot of the people in their 80s, 90s have some forms of dementia, and they prefer not to have a lot of people coming in and out of their home. And so it's a win-win, because caregivers don't want to have to get a second job, and clients don't want to have as many people coming in and out of their house. So we've embraced just paying a boatload of overtime, and just sort of built it into our cost model. And so that's a big chunk of the secret sauce. And does it mean that we have lower margins than other companies? Yes. So the amount of money that my caregivers make compared to the rate that the customer pays, the caregivers make more, so therefore my business margins are smaller. But I also have been able, based on the formula, I've been able to grow much larger, is what you heard me share earlier. And
40,000 hours a week.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's really simple, and it makes sense. Like, give your caregivers the hours that they need so that they can take care of their family, pay them a little bit more. But I talk to agencies all the time, and one of their main things is, how can I manage overtime? How can I know when somebody's going into overtime? Because I want to avoid that. Like, in both of you, in your opinions, why is there so much fear about paying overtime, and what's it going to take to change that paradigm shift? Well, it's time and a half, right? So if you have to hire another caregiver to fill a shift, you're going to have to pay them a whole time, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about that wrong.
Let me take this. So let's just say it's $13 an hour, and then another caregiver that goes is making $13 an hour, and so you don't have to pay. It's 13 time and a half, $19.50. Trying to do quick math. Is that right? Anyway, so instead of paying $19.50,
you're there.
That's a lot more expensive to you as a business than it is to pay $13 and just have a second different caregiver do it. Mm-hmm. But then my view is, you're paying, when the home care pulses and the statistics come out and say, well, you're going to have 70% turnover of caregivers. Well, then you got to have more people in your office and pay them more salaries to bring on more caregivers. They're going to leave and more to come on. Like, so instead of having to beef up internally and having to pay those salaries and benefits and expenses, why not just limit the amount of turnover, and then you don't have to worry about losing 7 out of 10 of your caregivers. And that just, to me, is very unwise. So I think just to pay overtime, and I've heard people say, well, Neal, of course you can do it. You can afford it. You're bigger. And I say, well, I don't know how you can get bigger without doing it. So you have to almost take a leap of faith and say, in my view, to say, look, I don't know how else I'm going to grow. I don't know how I'm going to get clients to stay with me longer, because unfortunately there's more issues. I mean, just simple math of, if you have 4 caregivers in the course of a week or 2 caregivers in the course of a week, there's 4 caregivers have lives also, and one may have to take off or go to the doctors or take their kid to an appointment. Then you have to restaff it, and then clients, elderly people, tend not to like another person that they don't know coming into the home. And so if you can just sort of minimize it and just, I don't know, pay the overtime, and you make up for it by having your cases last, your clients that get care last longer, and you don't have to have as much salary expense internally.
And to something you said earlier, Neal, you have less people coming into the home. And that's what our clients, especially during this pandemic, they were fearful of getting COVID. So they didn't want as many caregivers coming into the home. So you have consistency there. And there's nothing more frustrating than churning caregivers and having the client have to take that caregiver, a new caregiver, almost every week, take them through the routine that they have to learn and go through, and then all of a sudden they go. Not only is it frustrating for the client, but the industry experts say it costs us roughly, as home care agencies, about $4,200 for every caregiver that we turn over. So my hat's off to you, Neal. I give you a lot of credit, and I've learned a lot from you. The one thing that I would love to have you share, and Aaron, I hope you don't mind me asking him a question, But, I host a radio show, and you mentioned that earlier, and inquiring minds want to know. Neal, you took a leap of faith that you shared with me during this pandemic, and that is you cut back your minimums and you expanded those hours. Are you still at a higher minimum hours than you were before? And how's that working for you? Because as I said, clients don't want all these caregivers coming into the home, but caregivers too don't want to be stacking up shifts where they're going into 2, 3, or 4 clients' homes in the same day. They would prefer longer hours with fewer clients, so to speak.
You want us to go there, Aaron? Because I know we're time. I'm happy to share.
Oh, sure. Well, I was going to ask how you guys are innovating, to, stay relevant in today's market. And I think Bob just asked that question of you in just a little bit different way. So you can go, but Bob, you have to also input too. We want to know about you as well.
So, across the private pay home care space across the country, there's kind of evolved into this unwritten 4-hour minimum. Like if you're going to send a caregiver to the home, it's usually a 4-hour minimum. And some companies say minimum 3 days a week or 5 days a week or whatever. So that's just been the case. But I do think with the nationwide shortage of workers, and specifically home care workers, home care caregivers, it's almost like what's going to be a better service experience for the family. And so we have chosen, at least for a period of time, I don't think this will sustain itself, but I think for a period of time, we're like, look, people are needing care. There's almost like a lot of pent up demand. And despite the fact, we're bringing on a lot of caregivers and we're growing significantly. We want to make sure that every client that we do service, that we're going to do it well. And so we had chosen to turn away clients. One, across the nation, most companies would turn away caregivers that want less than 4-hour shifts. So we bumped that up to 6 hours, and we bumped it up to 8 hours, and then we bumped it back down to 4 hours. Like, it's all about sort of that whole supply and demand thing to make sure that the end experience to the family and the client is going to be a great one. Because they don't care. They just don't care whatever issues are going on, and they don't want to hear all the reasons why you can't staff a case or why you don't have coffee. Mm-hmm. They don't care. They just want a great caregiver for the hours that they're asking for. And it's our responsibility as business people to figure out that sort of that supply and demand to make sure that we can meet their needs.
Bob, what do you have to add to that?
So I will say this. There are so many home care companies that are looking to bolt on new revenue sources. And, people are trying to get into the PERS business. And for those that don't know what that is, that's the personal emergency response button that you push. And they customize that or white label it and sell it under their banner. And they have people managing those. They also, go into the side of, having home repair workers come in and, they look at bolting on all those service lines. And, for me, I think you got to stay with what brought you to the dance, and that's caregiving. And that's really what sets you apart. One of the things that we built here at Cypress, and Neal's aware of it, is that, we had a training lab that we opened up in 2004, and we trained all of our caregivers in that. And we also trained family members in that because that's the space we're in. We're in caregiving. Back in 2014, we evolved into extending our care services to dementia care and Alzheimer's care. And we have a dementia program that is specific to trying to keep people in their home. We have data that shows that we were and are able to keep clients in their home 7 to 8 months longer versus having them placed 7 to 8 months longer. And to people that are dealing with family members that have dementia or Alzheimer's, that's like an eternity. Mm-hmm. And what is involved in that? It's caregiving, it's caregiver training, It's teaching caregivers, especially on the dementia Alzheimer's side, how to make meaningful days. Anybody can stick a older adult in front of a television. So many parents do that with their children. But one of the things we know about dementia and Alzheimer's is you keep them socially engaged. You make sure that they eat their meals at the right time. They take their medications in the right doses at the right time. You can keep people in their home longer than you would otherwise. So that's, really the secret sauce is really sitting down and thinking about how you can make your company exceptional. I don't think you need to bolt on new lines of services and get out of your core. Your core business is caregiving, and you should stay true to that core.
I like the theme that you guys have set here. It sounds like there's a two-pronged approach to being successful. You've got to be agile on the business side of things and look at the market and leverage technology, leverage this whole gig economy that's coming about and expanding your pool of people that you can draw from. But really at the heart of your business is providing that good care, and that what you do in the home, the quality of what you should be providing in the home really hasn't changed very much in many decades. And if you can just focus on being really good at that and being agile on the outside and be aware of how the market is shifting, then that's the recipe for long-term success. Did I kind of summarize that from everything that we've been talking about? Yes. Okay. Well, we've talked about a couple of challenges some really big challenges, like getting in the home because there's a caregiver shortage, keeping our caregivers. But I think that there's challenges outside of that, even though that's what everybody is talking about these days. In your opinion, what are maybe 2 or 3 additional challenges that are real salient and will be important to address in 2022? And can you also provide your perspective on how agencies can get ahead of these challenges as they're thinking about what are my goals for next year?
All right. Thank you, Neal. First of all, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is really earning our seat at the table in the healthcare continuum. Home health, hospitals, physicians, hospice, they all share in the same pool of dollars. They all share in Medicare dollars, managed care dollars. They all get data, and data is the key to really substantiate their service to their communities as well as the institutions, the acute and post-acute providers that they're providing to. So, one of the biggest challenges I see for us is really earning our seat at that table and really being able to provide data. And that's where we need people like AlayaCare and others be able to provide us data and collecting data that shows the work that we're doing. And what specifically am I talking about? I'm on a committee with the Home Care Association of America. I'm on their board of directors, and it's the Data and Research Committee. And we are working with AlayaCare and many of the other software providers to start to collect data on ER visits, falls, urgent care visits, customer satisfaction, because we don't have the data that CMS delivers to the world on how these providers are performing. So I think, one of the things is that we have to earn our seat at the table. That's why I said early on, we can't call ourselves non-medical or non-clinical. We are very medical. I mean, if we're not in that home, making sure the clients are being fed, they're safe, they're getting bathed, they're clean, they're comfortable. If we don't do those things, they're going to end up back in the hospital, and they may end up, it may end up passing on. So we are a very integral part of that. We're that tip of the spear. And our clients, or should I say our caregivers, see the change in conditions before everyone else does, because the home health person is coming in for an episodic visit. In a lot of cases, maybe more so in my market than Neal's, where, this is more of a destination, Arizona, where the adult children live in other markets. We see those changes, and we have to report those changes, and we have to intercede. And hopefully we can do that in such a way that we can prevent a medical event from happening. So I think the biggest thing that we need to do is really earn our seat at that table. I think if anything that happened with this pandemic, a spotlight was shown on communal living, and it wasn't very favorable. And I, for one, am a little bit older than the two of you, but if I had trouble staying at home, there is no way I am wanting to go into a senior living community, especially with Omicron out there or whatever the next variant is out there. It's a scary place to be. If you can stay at home, we should be able to give every person that right and ability to do so. So I think the biggest challenge facing us right now is earning our seat at the table, collecting data, utilizing resources like AlayaCare and other providers to help us collect that data to support our place in the healthcare continuum.
I echo Bob's thoughts. I mean, it might make sense of why wouldn't we have a seat at the table? Because, as Bob said, we're not getting reimbursed from the government. If it's private pay, or if you pay for long-term care insurance, then, I mean, that's how it's paid for. And then, so there's no requirement for us to provide information as private pay companies. So however, these, the discharge planners that rehabs and hospitals and there is like this feeling of taboo, like you can't talk about money. And there are some affluent or more affluent or on that side of the affluent scale of people that are in a hospital or rehab, and then they're going to get discharged, and they would have liked to have known, okay, it's out of my pocket, but at least I know it exists. Like it just, so that's part of the challenge around, in my view, around why there's this taboo about talking about money. But I could go on and on about that, but I think the two other challenges I would say are, and I know we're talking to AlayaCare, and this is great, but one of them is the lack of sophistication of the home care software products for private pay home care. Now, granted, Honor and AlayaCare, I think, are pretty far ahead of the curve, but I still believe that it's just not, you got 87-year-old spouses and often immigrant workers that are lower wage income earners that have to understand this software. They have to get on their smartphone and figure out how to properly clock in and clock out. And did you give a bath? And did you dress? And did you bathe? And did you feed them? And they just want to know, like, what button do I push? And then, so for it to be anything, I mean, it's got to be like, I always tell the story about my now 13-year-old at the time when he was 3, and we just got an iPad. And he was navigating around it. And I'm like, how is a 3-year-old that can't read knowing where to go? I was fascinated. And the genius of the simplicity hasn't yet arrived, in my view, for the home care workers and the 87-year-old spouse, and quite frankly, even the office workers that are trying to navigate the software. So that is one area of, I think, is a challenge. The other one, in my view, is a lot of the regulations to do home care are outdated. And what was done 15 years ago to create a home care license, we talked about how we have had to evolve as an industry and as businesses. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of states, the regulations are archaic and they're not even applicable to what we're doing today. And so you either have, let's say, outdated or wrong regulations at this point that are literally hindering the experience of or force the customer or client to have to pay more money because of the amount of regulations that aren't even relevant today. And so businesses got to do a bunch of other extra stuff so they can check the government box and say, yeah, I'm doing it. I get surveyed, but in reality, it has no real material impact on the actual caregiving experience. And that I find very frustrating.
How do you think we change that?
Well, I can say this, one of the biggest challenges that Neal mentioned is so true, even with Honor, is that, they rely so much on tech. And, I think it's going to be hard, but I think it's going to change itself. And I hate to, just bring up this fact is that we're going through this generational shift. I mean, I talked about the baby boomers already, and the baby boomers are a lot different than this last generation. I mean, 87-year-olds aren't really good at navigating on their devices. No. But I will tell you, I'm a boomer, and most boomers I know are really good at that. And I think that shift is happening right now before all of us. And we're not really realizing that's happening. I mean, I am seeing more and more clients come on service that are boomers, more so than ever before. And, they have some serious health challenges, but they are more akin to adopting tech. But other than that, I know that AlayaCare and Honor and others try to make it as easy as possible. We do a little bit of Medicaid here. And the biggest challenge we have is with this EVV, electronic visit verification. And I will tell you, oftentimes we find ourselves with caregivers that just can't remember their passwords. And we're resetting their passwords time and time again. We know who those culprits are. And I guarantee you, there's not one of them that's 50 years or younger. It's the ones that are 50 years and older. So I don't have that solution, but I think it's going to take care of itself within the next 10 years, if not shorter. I mean, we are going through this shift right now, and it's happening right before us.
I think coming from a technology company, we absolutely have a responsibility to listen to you guys and listen to the people who use the technology and, do things like facial recognition and fingerprints. There's no resetting of passwords. I think we just need to work together. If you guys need the data to produce, to prove that you guys, to payer sources, that you're worth what you say you are and that you can keep people out of the hospital, then your technology partners have to be able to serve that up to you. And I'm just wondering if there's something that we can't help you with on the regulation front. I mean, dealing with those government entities, that's a really slow and very frustrating process. I have some experience in trying to change things in Texas to make it more provider friendly, but it's just a slow and tedious process. Neal, do you that was your thing. You think the regulations are off. Why? What pieces of those and what's your idea for agencies who are listening to this to make a difference, to move this in the right direction?
That's a great question. So I think, it's twofold. And, in around 53 years, we've done a lot of this to help frame and shape the regulations in my market. But it's a combination of like a civics lesson, the legislative branch, going to the local or state senators and delegates and getting them to put pressure on the healthcare department in their respective state. And preferably and ideally just talking directly to the people in the health department and trying to help them realize, I don't think they're ill-intended. I think it's a lack of awareness about how things have changed as much as they have in this particular sector of private pay home care. And it's just another thing to deal with and to try to get their attention, and the regs are already written and they're trying to update their assisted living regulations or their nursing home regs, or the CMS came down with another mandate, and it's like a prioritization where, well, okay, you guys get a caregiver in the house, and yes, they might be outdated, but that's not our biggest hurdle right now internally at the health department. So that's been, it doesn't mean we don't keep trying, and we have, and the state trade associations usually, if those states that have a trade association can usually communicate with, whether it's the legislators and or the health department. And I say this, it's frustrating. We've had a lot of success despite issuing as a concern. But even then, even what we agreed upon, and it was 4 or 5 years ago, is already starting to have negative ripple effects as time goes on. So I think it's just a pervasive, again, I think working through your state trade associations is probably the key to most of it. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully the executive directors of those respective state trade associations are savvy enough to know how to navigate these waters, because it's not that easy sometimes.
I think that's good advice. So what I'm hearing you guys say is, if you're not involved, if I'm listening to this, I'm an agency owner and I'm not involved with my state trade association, that's homework assignment number one for 2022 at some point. Get involved and make your voice heard. And I think also just explore the technology options and lean on your partners to make sure that you have the support you need from the operational side to do what you got to do. Bob.
I'll piggyback on what you're saying, Aaron, and what Neal said is that advocacy is so important. And Neal, you're absolutely right. We are better together than individuals. And, your mom, she was a trailblazer, and I would imagine that, the legislators, got to know her and they were like, what are you talking about? Because they didn't really understand our business. But it is so important for us as agency owners to come together with the trade association or the trade in general and to be active in our local government. Advocacy is so important. And there's an old adage that if you don't have a seat at the table, you might just find yourself on the menu. And for us, we need to have a seat at the table. And as much as I was talking about earlier, people don't really understand the work we do. We often get confused for home health. And we get confused for home health by doctors, by discharge planners, by social workers, you name it. They think we're one and the same. And we have to do our job of explaining who we are and the work that we do. So the listeners, and I know our listeners are mainly home care agencies. Please get involved in your state associations. Please get involved in whether it be the Home Care Association of America or the National Association of Home Care and Hospice, their PDHCA affiliate. You have to be involved. Your voice has to be heard. So I just want to add that to what Neal and you just said, Aaron. So I think it's very important.
Just a 30-second add-on, because I do think that I remember the first time through the state trade association, they said, we need some providers to testify. So there's also overcoming your own. People may have fear of like sitting in those desks and the formality and having to get up and testify and state your position about why this particular bill needs to pass or not pass, or whatever it may be. And like anything else in life, the more you do certain things, the more comfortable you get at it. But that is an element of it. And there's a fear I think a lot of people have about, oh my God, I'm talking to a senator or I'm talking to a state delegate. So, we don't have to go on and on about it. But the point being is that is something that some people are more comfortable doing, some are less. And, younger in my career, I would have freaked out having to testify and still did it. And I was probably horrible at it. And then as time goes on, you do things more enough times, you actually get to be okay.
Repetition is the mother of skill. For sure.
They put their pants on the same way you and I do.
Words right out of my mouth.
People just.
I didn't even know that 20 years ago. I thought they had different pants. Yes, you are correct. They are people too.
And the other interesting thing is if they don't know who we are, they're going to create rules and regulation that we're not going to like.
Yeah.
So you know what? It's better to be known. And then when a crisis does happen, they're going to call on us. They're going to call Neal and his organization and other organizations and me and ask us for input. Otherwise, they're going to create laws and regulations that we're not going to really like.
Absolutely. Not to be cliche, but the squeaky wheel does get the grease. And guys, I appreciate all the nuggets of wisdom you have provided in this last hour. Time flies, right? We've been talking for an hour. But you both are very exceptional humans, and you are out there just even beyond your own agencies doing things, speaking, writing. Before we get off, please tell the listeners if they want to find you on social or otherwise, how can they reach you guys?
Neal, you go first. It's about time.
Are you on TikTok?
I would say LinkedIn. I mean, my company name is, I guess it's cut off my name. It's Family and Nursing Care. So at a minimum, if you remember that, you can just Google it and that way. But I have an email. I mean, you're welcome to share my email address and my phone number, and I'm on LinkedIn. And I do think, to Bob's point, I mean, the more knowledge that's spread, the better as an industry we are and we can continue to be. And it's fortunate, Bob and I know each other clearly, just you can tell from our dialogue. And Thank you, by the way, Bob. You've been very, very gracious about, and you're being humble yourself. So, but I would just Neal Kursban, Family Nursing Care, email at like. Is there a way that you can post this on?
We can certainly put it in the show notes for you.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
So I'll add and just pick up on what's something I said earlier is that I find today this climate a lot different than it was before, where we need to work together. This is a problem for the trade and the industry, and not so much just regulation, just even if you go down to the micro level in the markets that we serve, because of these environmental and external forces that are challenging all of us, we need each other. I mean, there's Peter Roth from Senior Helpers uses the phrase frenemies. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're really not enemies. We're friends. And we all struggle with the same challenges. And, if you get stuck with a case that you just can't staff on a weekend, or you need a male caregiver and you don't happen to have one, that's the beauty of this space, is that, we're all in this because we're caring spirits. We're kindred spirits. We want to make a difference in people's lives. Listen, if we wanted to make money, we wouldn't be doing this. I can tell you that right now, because I've got a lot of friends that are making a lot more money than I ever have or will. But we do this because of our emotional and our passion bucket is just overflowing. We make differences in people's lives, and that in and of itself feels really good. And I feel great about doing that. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk to you. And I know Neal's the same way. Bob Roth at cypresshomecare.com, or go up to cypresshomecare.com. You can get a lot of good information there. I'm also on LinkedIn. Look me up, Bob Roth. I think it's CHS. But I know Aaron will put this information up there, as well as our phone numbers. I'm happy to talk to anyone, bounce any question off of me. I love what we do, and we make differences every day.
That's awesome. It's clear that you guys, like, the passion, the history, the passion is just wonderful, and we need more of you out in the industry. That's for sure. And it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Aaron.
Home Health 360 is presented by AlayaCare. First off, I want to thank our amazing guests and listeners. To get more episodes, you can go to alayacare.com/Home Health 360. That's spelled Home Health 360, or search Home Health 360 on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. The easiest way to stay up to date on our new shows is to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a newsletter you can sign up for on alayacare.com/Home Health 360 to get alerts for new shows and more valuable content from AlayaCare right into your inbox. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.